So many years ago, when the Romans left in 450-ish AD, and they left Britain in a terrible state with no rulers, the British took over, the Britons. And in that time there was a king called King Hurler. Now we do not know a lot about this king because those records from those days were not so accurate and not kept. But we do know this story of King Hurler and how he had a strange encounter in a forest with a king of the dwarfs, and how this encounter led to a story about time travel. Now, many years ago, in the land of the ancient Britons, there lived and ruled a mighty king. As you know, his name is King Hurler. And King Hurler was a wonderful and terrific king, very powerful, and he ruled with an iron fist. He went to war against many people to conquer and to make Britain a safe place. And did he succeed in that? Well, that's another story for another day. But one time, for we have one tale of King Hurler in English folklore. One time the king was going out in the countryside. He was invited to a wedding. And so as in those days, he got ready, he had a good, fine horse. He gathered his bodyguards and he took his servants. And they set off on a journey to go up north to go to this wedding. It was quite a custom to be invited to weddings because weddings, especially of powerful people, were very important. And of course the feasting and the merriment would go on for days. I think if I was invited to a wedding like that with, enormous amount of mead and the most splendid food, I would definitely go. And of course, being a king, he would not walk to the wedding. He would ride on his favourite horse. And like all kings, he had bodyguards to protect him. Armoured men in mail, and swords and shields. And as long as this tale goes, for as long as we've known it, it has always been a tale of mystery. He took his servants, because let's face it, you need servants as a king to look after you and to feed your food and to make your bed and do all the things that servants do. And so on they went. They set off from his palace and they rode along the road. But halfway through the journey, they had to go through a massive forest. And the forests in those times were very overgrown. You can imagine trees as big as skyscrapers with mighty trunks. For in those days in Britain, we've not got to that stage where we chop down all the big trees and we've not managed the woods and the forests like we do today and we did in the past. And so they came to the forest, and this forest was well known for having bandits and wild creatures like big bears and wolves. This is why you always travelled in numbers as a group. And so they set off through this forest. It was the most perilous part of the journey. But something a bit strange happened. For it took a few days to go through the forest, and halfway through the forest they came to a clearing where they camped for the night. But lo and behold, something very strange and supernatural happened. For out of the forest came a dwarf, a wee man with a big grey beard, stocky and well built, and he had a crown on his head. Well, at first they thought it was a bit strange and thought, who's this little fellow coming to greet us and say hello? I think I would be partly worried. Are they going to attack this group, the king's retinue, as we often call it? Well, no, the dwarf king, for he was indeed a king, came in peace. And he says, "Hello, who are you, wandering and walking and travelling through my forest?" For the forest indeed did belong to this dwarf king, who has no name in this story. And King Hurler explained, "Well, I am King Hurler of the Britons, and I am travelling up north to a wedding." And by this the dwarf was quite astonished. He said, "What are the chances of that? For this very evening in the underworld where I live and my kin are from, we are having a wedding tonight. And I would like to invite you and your bodyguards and your servants to come to our wedding." Well, not being rude, the king says, "Okay, we will follow you and we will go to your wedding as honoured guests." And so the king and his bodyguards and the servants got on their horses and they followed the dwarf king, who was riding a small pony. And they came to a cave. And they went into the cave, and the cave led to the dwarf kingdom and the underworld. Would you go? Let me know. And so the king and the dwarf and the bodyguards and the servants went through the cave, and they came to a mighty big hall. And there was all these dwarfs sat round in tables, drinking mead and wine. They had the meats of the best variety of venison, and they had wild boar and pig and all the quality food you could imagine of this time period. Oh, it makes me hungry. And so the king was invited to sit at the top table, because the higher the rank, the more status you had in those times, the higher you sat at the table. And the King Hurler and the dwarf king sat together, and they feasted, and they drank the best mead he has ever tasted. And there was dance, and there was wrestling and leg wrestling, and there was all manner of games there was playing, and everybody had a great time. And it was coming to the end of the wedding, where the king had to go, King Hurler, back to the forest to continue his journey. But before this happened, the dwarf king grabbed the arm of King Hurler, and he said, "I must give you a warning. When you go back to the overworld, as they called it in the dwarf kingdom, you must not get off your horse until you go back to your palace." On that warning, they said goodbye. King Hurler thanked the dwarf for his hospitality, for the good food and the good drink. And they went through the cave, they went back the way they came, until they came to the wood, the forest. Some say it is haunted, and some say not. I'll let you make your mind up over that one. And again they came to the clearing. It was night time, and it was too late to continue their journey. So the king ordered his servants to put up some tents and light a fire. And some of the servants got off their horses, but something very strange and supernatural happened. For as soon as the servants touched the ground with their feet, they immediately turned to dust. A scary thing, I'm sure you agree. But then the king remembered the warning of the dwarf, that on no account are you to get off your horse until you get to your palace. So they rode back home to go to the palace where they knew they would be safe. But when they came out of the forest, they noticed that things weren't quite, the right. they noticed that things have changed. The land had been altered in the sense of it's being ploughed and farmed more. There was more settlements and more people. And by chance they met a man on the road. And being ancient Britain, they tried to talk to him, but he was talking a different language. For he was a Saxon. And many, many years have passed, not unknowing to the king. Centuries indeed have passed, and the King Hurler had returned to a much later time. Some say time travel. For in the underworld, time is different. A few hours in the underworld is hundreds of years in the overworld. And so the King Hurler, being the wisest of kings, rode back to his palace. And at first he was a bit nervous about getting off his horse, thinking, well, what if I turn to dust? That will be no more. And so he ordered some of his servants and bodyguards to get off their horses. They was very reluctant, I'm sure you'd agree. If you have seen some of your friends turn to dust and they stepped upon the ground, I think I would be a bit nervous about getting off my horse. But they was in the king's palace, or what would remained of it, because centuries have passed. The palace had been abandoned. It was overgrown with ivy, and trees were growing out of the ground all over the place. But yes, when the servants and the bodyguards stepped off the horse, they did not turn to dust. And the wise King Hurler knew that he was safe again. And whether he ruled in the land of the Saxons is another story. And again, because a lot of history is not written down, it is verbally passed on, we don't know this. So that is the tale of King Hurler. But if you have enjoyed it, then please give us a subscribe, because we do love our stories and we do love to entertain you. But is time travel a real thing? Because there are many stories in folklore from Scandinavia to Ireland to ancient Britain and Europe and across the world of people time travelling. I like to think it's true. And on that point, I will say goodbye to you. And I do hope you've enjoyed this folk tale of the ancient king of the Britons, King Hurler, and how he time travelled back to the times of the Anglo-Saxons. It must have been very confusing for him. But yet, being a mighty king, he would have made the best out of the situation. So thank you for watching. Thank you for taking the time. Goodbye from me. Please leave us a comment and a like as I wave my Langsats in the air for the thumbnail.